A reading from Hebrews chapter 1, beginning at verse 1. Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets. But in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God, and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. After making purification for sins, he sat down at the right hand of the Majesty on high, having become as much superior to angels, as the name he has inherited is more excellent than theirs. In this day and age that we live in, which is full of marketing and focus groups and spin doctors, the question of who can you believe is an important one. In fact, can you trust anything anymore? If a politician were to come to you and say, "Trust me," would you trust that politician? I suspect not. In fact, in a survey from 2020, more people trusted nurses than doctors, which is an interesting thing to think about. 13% would trust an advertising executive. Vicars? Well, only 56% would trust a vicar, which is slightly less than the random person in the street. 57% of people would trust a random person walking down the road, but only 56% would trust their local vicar. And the stakes are higher when it comes to the church, because simply put, who do you trust to speak for God? If someone stands up to preach, well, what criteria do you use to assess them, to see whether what they're saying is true or simply reflecting their own prejudices? The church itself is divided, after all, on so many issues, and not everyone can be right all of the time. And how do we distinguish the voice of God from our emotions or our wishful thinking? And of course, you've got other religions. And that raises questions too. Are they all essentially the same, all different paths to God? But then they're contradictory. They can't all be true. You might think that they should all be embraced together, that you should be able to find truth in them all. But if you think that you can put them all together, if you think you can find the element of truth in that one and that one and that one, well, that simply makes you the judge of truth. Now, in the Old Testament, of course, it was so much simpler. The prophets would say, "Thus saith the Lord," but that was then and this is now. How do we know what is true? Particularly when the church is facing more opposition, when the church is fading from its influence on public life, this question of knowing what is right and what is true is all the more important. And that, fortunately, is the issue being addressed in the book of Hebrews, because life actually was not so different back then. And the answer given by this author to the letter to the Hebrews is a foundational one, and it lies at the heart of the Christian faith. He writes, "In these last days he has spoken to us by his Son." Long ago he had said God spoke via the prophets, but now he has spoken to us by his Son, not to contradict the prophets, but rather to fulfill the prophets, like the blazing light of the sun overpowering the light of a candle. So the sun eclipses, so Christ eclipses the prophets. And so it is that if we want to see God, we look to the Son, we look to Jesus. He is, after all, quotes, the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature. So now God speaks through his Son and through no one else. There are no new prophets, simply the Son. So if people point you elsewhere, walk away. Now, there are two implications of all of this. First of all, we can be confident that we have all that we need contained in the Scriptures, because here are the words of the Son, the words of Jesus himself, and also words about Jesus himself. There is our knowledge, there is our source for the wisdom of God. The Bible is sufficient for all that we need. The standard against all preachers, including this one, are to be judged. And secondly, when we seek to relate to God, well, we can relate to God through his Son. We can only relate to God through Christ because he is God with a human face, one like us, but yet also divine. We pray to a God who knows, who understands, and who has lived a human life, one who has hungered and cried and grieved. So we should accept no substitute. We should seek no substitute, for there is no one else but Christ alone. Here is your hope and your fulfillment and your future. So go back, therefore, to the question at the beginning. How do we know anything about God? Well, the answer to that is by looking to his Son.